Hello, everyone. Dave was a man who seemed to have it all: wealth, status, and a life many would envy. As the owner of three thriving car tuning businesses in Los Angeles, he had built his empire from scratch through sheer determination and hard work. His love for cars wasn't just a hobby, it was the cornerstone of his success. With a sharp business sense and an unwavering passion, Dave had earned his reputation as one of the best in the industry. Despite the demands of his career, Dave never let his work overshadow the bond he shared with his wife, Sandra. She wasn't just the love of his life, but also his confidant and partner in everything. They both shared a passion for fitness, often challenging each other to push their limits during intense workout sessions. Even with their busy schedules, they prioritized spending quality time together, cherishing the comfortable life they had built, a life filled with small luxuries and moments of pure happiness. That summer, craving a change of scenery and a break from the fast-paced grind of Los Angeles, Dave and Sandra decided to take a vacation in Bali. They had been eagerly anticipating the trip, a chance to relax, explore, and soak in the island's natural beauty. The first 2 days were a whirlwind of scenic hikes, serene beaches, and mouth-watering local cuisine. It was a much-needed escape, and they savored every moment. On their third day, they decided to check out a local gym perched on a hill overlooking the coast. The gym offered a stunning view of the ocean, where waves crashed against jagged rocks below, a truly inspiring spot for a workout. The idea of exercising in such a unique setting excited Dave, and Sandra was just as enthusiastic. Fitness wasn't merely a routine for them. It was a shared ritual that kept them connected. Once inside, they chose to focus on their individual routines. Dave, feeling particularly motivated, set his sights on an intense arm workout, while Sandra headed to the section where she could work on her back. They exchanged a quick smile and a kiss before parting ways, each diving into their own world of weights and reps. About an hour into his workout, Dave decided to switch machines. As he walked across the gym, his eyes casually drifted to where Sandra was. That's when he noticed it: a tall, muscular man standing uncomfortably close to her, his broad shoulders and strong arms impossible to miss. The man had his hands on her waist, assisting her with her form. Sandra didn't move away. In fact, she seemed momentarily caught off guard. A wave of irritation surged through Dave. The man was crossing a line, acting far too familiar with his wife. Without a second thought, Dave strode toward them, his heart pounding faster with every step. He wasn't the kind of man to tolerate disrespect, especially when it came to Sandra. "Excuse me," Dave said, his voice firm and laced with restrained anger. "What do you think you're doing? She's my wife." The man quickly let go of Sandra's waist and turned to face Dave, a mixture of surprise and mild embarrassment on his face. "Oh, hey man," he said, raising his hands in a gesture of apology. "I didn't mean any disrespect. I was just helping her with her form. My name's Samuel, by the way." Dave's expression remained cold, uninterested in the introduction. He had never been one to tolerate strangers getting too close to Sandra, and this situation felt particularly intrusive. Sensing the tension, Sandra stepped between them, gently placing a hand on Dave's arm. "It's nothing, Dave," she said softly, her voice calm but firm. "He was just helping me out. Let's not make a scene." Reluctantly, Dave nodded and walked away, but the irritation lingered. The image of Samuel's hands on Sandra's waist stuck in his mind, refusing to fade. The rest of his workout was a blur, his thoughts clouded by a mix of frustration and unease. Later that evening, as they strolled along a quiet beach near their hotel, Sandra noticed Dave's tension. She gently squeezed his hand, her voice soothing as she tried to reassure him. "It really wasn't a big deal," she said with a small smile. "Samuel just noticed I was struggling with my posture and offered to help. There's no need to get upset." Dave nodded, trying to let the rhythmic sound of the waves ease his mind, but the image of Samuel lingered like an unwelcome guest. While Sandra's words calmed him slightly, a nagging discomfort remained. Trust had always been a cornerstone of their relationship, yet this incident stirred emotions he hadn't expected. It wasn't rational, but his protective instincts made it hard to simply let go. That night, They decided to have dinner at a cozy seaside restaurant known for its live music and breathtaking sunset views. They found a table near the edge, where they could watch the sky transform into shades of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. Hoping to distract himself, Dave ordered his favorite seafood dish, determined to enjoy the beauty of the evening and Sandra's company. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Dave's eyes roamed over the restaurant, casually taking in the crowd. But his stomach clenched when he spotted Samuel. The muscular man was sitting just a few tables away, surrounded by a group of equally athletic friends, laughing and gesturing animatedly. They seemed like locals, enjoying a lively night out. Every so often, Samuel's gaze drifted toward Dave and Sandra, lingering just long enough to spark irritation. Dave's jaw tightened, and a familiar surge of anger began to rise. He balled his hands into fists under the table, struggling to keep his composure. Sandra noticed the sudden shift in his demeanor and followed his line of sight. Her hand rested lightly on his arm as she whispered, "Dave, let it go. It's just a coincidence he's here. We're in a small area. It's bound to happen." But Dave couldn't brush it off that easily. To him, it felt deliberate, like some unspoken provocation. Lowering his voice, he said sharply, "I don't want him around. Either we leave, or I'll go over there and make sure he knows to stay away." Sandra's expression shifted to a mix of concern and frustration. "Don't do something you'll regret," she pleaded softly. "We're here to enjoy ourselves, not to start fights." Reluctantly, Dave stayed, though his attention remained fixated on Samuel. Every laugh and every glance Samuel sent in their direction felt like a taunt, feeding Dave's growing frustration. Deep down, he knew his reaction was rooted in pride, but he couldn't help himself. The tension gnawed at him, leaving him restless and distracted for the rest of the evening. The next morning, Sandra suggested they explore more of the island to lighten the mood. But just as they were making plans, Dave received an urgent call from his team in Los Angeles. They needed his input on a potential relocation for one of his businesses. The timing couldn't have been worse, but Dave prided himself on always being available when needed. With a sigh, he told Sandra to go ahead without him, promising to catch up later. Sandra looked disappointed, but masked it with a brave smile. "All right," she said, leaning in to kiss him. "I'll check out some places and take pictures. We can go together another day." Dave spent the next several hours buried in work, jumping from one call to another. Every now and then, his thoughts wandered to Sandra, wondering what parts of the island she was exploring. He reassured himself that everything was fine, but a faint unease lingered, an intuition he couldn't shake. By evening, Dave had finally wrapped up his work. He messaged Sandra, suggesting they meet at another local restaurant. On his way there, he felt a mix of anticipation and impatience, hoping a quiet dinner would help them reconnect and put the tension of the past days behind them. As he neared the restaurant, he decided to call Sandra to let her know he was on his way. The phone rang a few times before she picked up, her voice slightly breathless. "Hey Dave," she said casually. "I'm on my way. I'll be there in about half an hour." Her words were ordinary enough, but something about her tone felt off. As he ended the call, a movement caught his eye. A car parked along the road, rocking faintly as if someone inside had shifted. He raised an eyebrow, vaguely amused. "Someone's having a good time," he muttered to himself with a dry chuckle. Then the car's interior light flicked on, illuminating the figures inside for just a split second. Dave's amusement vanished as his stomach dropped. There, unmistakably, was Samuel. And on the dashboard sat a handbag Dave recognized instantly. It was Sandra's. A tidal wave of emotions crashed over him. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. He pulled over abruptly, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of suspicion and doubt that now felt all too clear. Without thinking, Dave opened his trunk and grabbed the first thing his hands found, a car jack. His hands trembled as he lifted it, barely registering its weight. His vision narrowed, and his thoughts blurred into one singular focus, confronting them. He marched toward the car, his pulse pounding in his ears. Without hesitation, he swung the car jack down onto the windshield, the sound of shattering glass ripping through the still night. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Dave stood there, chest heaving, the car jack still clutched tightly in his hands. The car door swung open, and Sandra stepped out, draped in nothing but a beach towel. Her face was a mask of shock, her wide eyes locking onto Dave as she took in the sight of him standing there, the jack gripped in his trembling hands. Behind her, Samuel climbed out of the car, visibly rattled but trying to maintain a calm exterior. He was shirtless, wearing only a pair of shorts, and it was clear he hadn't expected Dave to appear. Dave's eyes darted between Sandra and Samuel, struggling to process what he was witnessing. 1,000 scenarios had played in his mind before, but none had prepared him for the harsh, undeniable reality of this moment. His throat tightened as he looked at Sandra, the woman he had loved and trusted, standing there with another man. "Dave," Sandra began, her voice unsteady, trembling with panic. "It's not what it looks like. I can explain." But Dave was past explanations. The raw pain in his eyes was unmistakable as he stepped forward, his grip tightening on the car jack. "Explain," he said, his voice low and shaking with fury. "What could you possibly say to fix this? You cheated on me with him after everything we've been through?" Sandra's face crumpled, her expression a mixture of shame and desperation. She fumbled for words, but each attempt felt hollow, even to her. She had crossed a line, and no excuse could undo what had been done. "Dave, please," she stammered, her hand reaching out toward him. "Just listen. It's not as simple as it looks." Sensing the tension building, Samuel took a cautious step forward, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. His voice was steady but tinged with guilt. "Listen, man," he said, his tone earnest. "I didn't mean any disrespect. I swear, Sandra told me things were complicated between you two. It just happened." The words hit Dave like gasoline on a fire. His anger flared, his jaw tightening as he turned to Samuel. His eyes burned with a dangerous intensity. "You thought you could just walk into my life and destroy everything," he spat, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You thought you could take what's mine?" Samuel flinched, taking a step back, clearly unnerved by Dave's fury. Yet he didn't deny his actions. Instead, he lowered his gaze, his voice soft with regret. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I crossed a line. I know that. But it wasn't just me." Sandra's face went pale as her gaze darted between the two men. She felt as if the world was closing in around her. Her voice cracked as she pleaded, "Dave, please. Let's just go home and talk about this. I know I hurt you, but we can figure it out. Don't make decisions based on what you think you saw." Dave laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and hollow. "Figure this out?" he said, stepping back and letting the car jack fall to his side. "What's left to figure out? I saw it. I saw everything. There's no other story here, Sandra. You betrayed me. How could you?" His voice broke on her name, the raw pain cutting through his anger. Sandra flinched at the sound, her heart aching with guilt. She had known this moment would hurt him, but she hadn't grasped just how deep his heartbreak would go. She had convinced herself her actions were a result of the distance between them, a symptom of their struggles. But now, faced with the consequences, she realized just how wrong she had been. Samuel, recognizing there was nothing left to say, took a step back, giving the couple space. "Look," he muttered, his voice heavy with regret. "I'll leave. This was a mistake." He cast Sandra a final look, filled with remorse and resignation, before walking away into the night. Sandra's gaze lingered on him briefly before she turned back to Dave, her voice breaking. "Dave, please," she whispered, reaching out to him. "I know I hurt you. I didn't want this to happen, but it doesn't have to end like this. Let's just go somewhere and talk." Dave looked at her, his expression a painful mixture of disbelief, anger, and sorrow. He opened his mouth to respond but quickly closed it, shaking his head as though words no longer held meaning. Slowly, he lowered the car jack and placed it back into the trunk of his car. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at Sandra with an intensity that seemed to cut through her, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. Without a word, Dave climbed into his car and slammed the door shut. Sandra reached for him, but the sound of the tires screeching against the pavement was already slicing through the silence of the night. She stood there, watching the taillights fade into the distance, an overwhelming sense of loss and regret washing over her. Deep down, she knew this was the end. The drive back to the hotel was a blur for Dave. His mind swirled with fragments of memories, bits and pieces of their life together that no longer seemed to fit. Each recollection felt stained, like a faded photograph marred beyond recognition. He thought of the quiet mornings they had shared, the little moments that had once brought them joy, and the future they had planned. Now, every memory felt like a cruel reminder of what had been lost. Dave parked hastily outside the hotel, his steps brisk as he strode through the lobby. He moved with a sense of urgency, as though escaping from a nightmare he couldn't wake from. The hotel staff greeted him with polite smiles, oblivious to the storm raging inside him. He barely acknowledged them. His mind was consumed by a single thought: leaving. He needed to distance himself from the crushing pain that threatened to overwhelm him. When he entered their suite, the remnants of their time together struck him like a punch to the gut. Clothes were scattered on the chairs, an open suitcase lay on the floor, and Sandra's perfume lingered faintly in the air. Each detail was a cruel reminder of the life they had shared, a life that now felt irreparably broken. His movements became robotic as he packed, tossing his belongings into the suitcase without care. He wasn't thinking about what he grabbed. He was focused only on erasing every trace of this place and the memories it held. As he zipped the suitcase shut, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Glancing at the screen, he saw Sandra's name flash across it. For a moment, he hesitated, the emotions bubbling to the surface again. But then he let it ring, unwilling to hear whatever excuse or explanation she might offer. Nothing she could say would erase what he had seen. Minutes later, he was standing at the reception desk, suitcase in hand. The clerk greeted him with the same warm smile as when he'd first arrived, completely unaware of the turmoil Dave was experiencing. "Checking out early, sir?" the clerk asked, glancing at the luggage. "Yes," Dave replied, his voice quiet but resolute. "Cancel the remaining days. And anything left in the room, just throw it out. I don't need it." The clerk hesitated, slightly startled by the abruptness, but nodded and complied. As Dave handed over the room key, he felt a heavy sense of finality settle over him. It wasn't just the end of their vacation. It was the symbolic closing of a chapter in his life. He had already decided that there was no going back. Once the formalities were done, Dave booked the earliest flight back to Los Angeles. He didn't care about the details. He just needed to get home. Though he knew the house would feel empty without Sandra, at least it was familiar ground. A place where he could think, grieve, and figure out what came next. On the plane, Dave stared blankly out the window, the clouds below blurring into a haze. His thoughts were a chaotic tangle of anger, sadness, and disbelief. The betrayal felt raw, like an open wound too deep to fully comprehend. He tried to distract himself, focusing on work or thinking about his businesses, but every thought was shadowed by Sandra's face, her touch, her laugh, her voice. These were once his sources of comfort, but now they only brought pain. By the time the plane landed in Los Angeles, Dave had come to a decision. He couldn't return to the life they had built together. Too much had been shattered, and trust, once broken, was something he couldn't repair. For him, betrayal wasn't just a mistake. It was the death of everything they'd shared. The first thing he did after arriving home was contact a real estate agent. He arranged to put the house on the market immediately. The decision felt like shedding a weight he could no longer bear. Every room, every corner of the house, was steeped in memories of a love that now felt hollow. He couldn't live among those echoes, knowing the foundation of their life together had crumbled. In the days that followed, Dave methodically removed every trace of Sandra from his life. He packed her belongings and arranged for their disposal, determined to rid himself of anything that reminded him of her betrayal. Friends reached out, sensing something was wrong, but Dave kept his replies brief. He wasn't ready to share the details of his pain. This was his burden to carry, and he intended to bear it alone. Instead, he poured himself into his work with a renewed intensity. His businesses became his refuge, a place where he could regain control and channel his energy. As he threw himself into building his empire, he began to see his own strength and realized he didn't need anyone else to define his worth. His achievements were his alone, and they gave him purpose. But at night, when the world grew quiet and the distractions faded, he would feel a pang of sorrow. He couldn't deny how deeply he had loved Sandra, and the void she left behind was something he couldn't ignore. Yet with each passing day, the pain dulled, replaced by a steely resolve to move forward. He would rebuild his life, not for anyone else, but for himself. Dave had changed. He was no longer the man who believed in forever or the promises of love. He had learned the value of self-reliance and the importance of trusting only himself. Love had betrayed him, but in its place, he found determination. He would start anew, forging a life that was his alone, one built on his own terms. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel. Bye.